for being here. I'm Ben Smith with AFCEA, and I'll be introducing your speaker for this morning's session. This session is approved for both CompTIA CEUs and GAC CPEs, so if you're an AFCEA member and you'd like to have your badge scanned to receive documentation of your attendance, I'll be over here after the session to scan your badges. If you're not a member, you can get your badge scanned and step across the aisle to the AFCEA booth, number 213, to join today. Presenting the session this morning is Mr. Mac Martin, Chief Cyber Support Element and Transformation and Technology Integrator at the U.S. Army Cyber Center of Excellence at Fort Gordon. Mr. Martin?
Appreciate it. All right, I lost my laser already. It's somewhere around here. Good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Mac Martin from the Cyber Center of Excellence, and we've gone through a lot of transformation over the last few years within the Army on cyber and EW and Spectrum, and I'm going to give you a little bit of that today. I want to talk specifically about cyber situational awareness and cyber situational understanding from the commander's perspective, and then a couple of things that we're trying to do in the Army to better integrate capabilities across our staffs. One of the things that is a little bit different with the Army is just simply the mass of soldiers that typically are involved on the ground and how we are working the staff unit requirements to make sure commanders understand what they have for access to their mission set. And that's really kind of the big thing right now that we're trying to do is really educate, what is there, what can we use, and how we should be using it. So I'll cover that today a little bit. My background a little bit, retired Navy, flew electronic attack jets all my life. Actually worked a lot for using INSCOM capabilities, special electronic attack, and some other things, which was really network control capabilities that then has now turned and morphed into cyber over the years. CNO planner with INSCOM for a while, then worked at Stratcom and a few other places. I've been with our cyber. I was with our cyber for about 3 years, got transitioned down to Cyber Center of Excellence, supporting Major General Stephen Fogarty, former INSCOM commander, who is down there right now as the commanding general. So this has kind of been the best way to put it is we've been doing this work for some time inside what we call the force modernization proponent. It's really bringing the .mil-PF capabilities to the service. You'll see some of that in the discussions when I talk about analysis and where we've been. So let's just move right on. So today, what are we going to talk about? Move that a little closer. Hopefully it's... All right, so understanding is a little different than awareness. How many times have you heard someone say from a report, especially an incident report, well, we were aware, we knew that there was something going on in the network. We just didn't know why or what. And then a secondary action occurred, and the commander didn't understand what the impact was. And then now you've got a larger incident that you have to deal with or mitigate. Well, that's the difference in awareness and understanding by Army doctrine. And I know that the joint terminology, we don't, as an Army officer or Army civilian, we don't always align exactly with the joint because we look at it a little bit differently. Like, say, command and control. You guys in the joint world, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, we still use those terms. In the Navy, we call it mission command. Okay, and it's really geared around our commanders. That's the way we do it. Cyber SA is Cyber SU, and I'll explain the differences here in just a second. So, but they're very much nested with each other, and they are complementary of each other. Okay, this is kind of the stuff we're going to talk about today. So the first thing that I want to cover is a little history. How many folks have never heard of this incident? I mean, if anybody hasn't, it's okay. I understand. We've got some young guys on the ground. I'm starting to become the old gray man myself, so I understand. But this was really the first time where we saw integrated cyber and electronic warfare used on a large-scale operation by a near-peer actor, and it was extremely successful. We actually had the delegation come out to the Combined Arms Center at Fort Leavenworth, which is where I work, for General Fogarty and the Cyber Center. But they actually, they came out, and the generals and everyone sat down with our generals, and they said, okay, what was the impact? And the point was, they were crippled. They were not crippled by just cyber, because everyone uses the spectrum in certain parts and pieces of whatever their command and control architecture is. But the point is, you can't separate them. So not only did they become crippled and unable to command their own forces, the Georgian forces, but they were also they actually lost infrastructure in those attacks. and in losing that infrastructure, some of it never recovered. Their economic, as far as the money and financial sector of their country, was hurt pretty bad. But the big point was it was done integrated with traditional maneuver. That's the big thing to take away. All right, so now let's fast forward to 2014. Okay, and what are we seeing again? It's the same exact thing, except it's better this time. When I say better, it's better for the Russians, worse for the Ukrainians. And why is it worse? Well, they've already perfected their techniques and tactics. They don't have any brand new silver bullets on the battlefield. They've got the same ones that they used in 2008, except for a few other things that they may have bought along the line. But the point is, they are very good, and they have their own units specifically designed to do nothing but cyber and electronic warfare preparation environment and conduct operations. Okay, so they are completely integrated into their scheme of maneuver, if you would. And then I actually had this slide. I used this slide a year and a half, almost 2 years ago at another AFCEA event, and I lost my laser pointer. But anyway, that flag piece over there was what I keyed in on really back then, and I will tell you that it's come to fruition. We are really fighting on a peer-to-peer basis. A lot of actions that are ongoing. It's becoming a lot more escalated than even we thought. So some threats. Anyway, the thing about threats, of course, this cyber NEW, it's really spectrum is the access point, or cyberspace is the access point. You can see the different types, the different things that are up there, but really the bottom was what I really want to talk to you about, because a threat changes every day. So what was a threat today may not be the threat tomorrow. However, the way that next threat comes along and actions their mission doesn't really change. So when we talk about in technology, I need to be able to buy stuff faster and faster and faster, well, that may be the case for a tool or some type of code. But the infrastructure that supports all that doesn't change daily. Matter of fact, in the Army, it's supposed to be refreshed, in DOD, it's every 18 months, something like that. I will tell you that it doesn't happen in every 18 months, okay? I'm still using the same 34-pound laptop that I've been using for 5 years, okay? So in the Army, I got a new one, but it's still a 35-pound laptop, all right? So the point being is you got to kind of look at it in two different ways when we talk about capabilities, all right? Planning and scanning, that happens every day. We are being scanned 24/7, 365, wherever we are. That's just the way it is. You think about how many users are on the internet now. I saw a number the other day where, in 2014 it was like some 200-something billion or whatever. It was something off the wall, and I took that slide out because it was old. Just because when I looked the other day at the statistics for growth of regions, who do you think was the largest growth? Let's take a stab at it. Asia. Asia had 72% of the overall population growth in cyberspace in the last 24 months. That should worry you. It worries me a little bit. But anyway, so if they're doing the planning, the exploitation piece, again, the little pieces and parts of what they're using doesn't really change, but their tactics and their intent, that's really what you got to understand is why. Why are they going after me? What do I have? Well, I'm DOD, so yeah, I understand that. But what specifically in DOD? Because DOD is huge. So if they're coming after specifically the Pentagon, then why are they going specifically after that directorate in the Pentagon? And understanding it. That's the point that really becomes situational understanding. Lateral movement, all they got to do is get in once and then they can move. You've heard that before. And then exfiltration, that's really the issue. We can see exfiltration. What we can't see is manipulation. And we really can't see really the bottom line intent if it were to become a true exploit. So this shows kind of an operational convergence discussion, which is really kind of the basis of why we need this situational understanding. Near-peer competitors, they use cyber and EW daily. As you can see some of the over here to the right, the advanced EW and C4ISR. C4ISR is that integration piece that we actually heard this morning out on the floor, which is really key. What intel support is done for cyber and EW? Well, it's not done specifically for cyber and EW, but there's aspects that are done. Well, I would say that in cyberspace, there is specific intelligence based on a cyber or EW commander's requirement to support that mission. So just understand that So like in the air, you have a, let's just use, you have an EC-130, they have a requirement, they have a mission, they have a commander. Well, the SIGINT folks that are working with them or whoever, they have specific missions and requirements also. It's how that you integrate those two that becomes really important. One of the things that we really are seeing now with this ISIL fight is just the hegemony issue. And it's not just ISIS, because we actually have seen that every year that I was ever in the military, 28, 30 years now, where there's always been some group that stood up to try to dominate an area based on either ideology or religious views or ethnic backgrounds. So that's nothing new. But what is new is the way that they're doing it right now. There's some tactics that they're really employing that's a little bit different. We're working it, but just that's my biggest point, is how the tactics have evolved over the time. And you can see the rest of it there as far as the big thing. The big point around here, though, is that now we're seeing this centerpiece. We're seeing that centerpiece at all the different levels according to what there are. If they're an ISIL, then we're seeing at their different levels, they still have their own command and control or mission command of their forces. When you see it at a nation state, it's easier to see. We've been able to really monitor the nation state stuff, but whenever you're getting in an ideology or organization, it's a little different, but still you can find it. Oops, too much. All right, so obligatory definitions here for us. Got to kind of do those. I actually didn't keep the one in for cyberspace cyberspace domain. You should know that by now, hopefully. But the point being, CyberSA, this is really what it talks about. It's in the joint pub. Okay, it is not found in any Army publication. And I'll explain to you in just a second as to why. But this is what starts the basis of anything for us. Okay, DODIN is the foundation. So I know that people, I've heard 2 or 3 times in this event that we really need to key in on DCO and OCO. And I'm not saying we don't. But I'm telling you right now, if we don't do DODIN operations correctly, we're not going to get to a DCO capability. We're not going to be effective in that area. And so we talk about an operational platform. The DODIN is that operational platform for the Army. So under the JIE construct, we're moving towards that. We actually have our own called Common Operating Environment, which is the Army's version of the JIE. Just like the DODIN, we had Land Warnet, that was what we used to call it now. That's transitioned and changed. But what we're trying to say on the DODIN piece is, it's not just like the idea of, okay, well, I got Land Warnet. Because we also have logistics networks, we have JAG networks, we got medical, 3 or 4 others, and then there's the Land Warnet piece, was the G6, what they always own. Well, now we're collapsing, including JWICs, by the way. So we're actually pulling all that transport together now. That's the big thing where we're going with Common Operating Environment. So it used to be that the S6 would take care, G6 would take care of their specific part of Land Warnet, and then you had all these other networks that would flow in. And in the future, that's not going to be the case. You're going to have a single network, and it's going to be up to the signal regiment to continue to take care of that, including all 3 different domains as far as classification. So that's really important for us. And this is doctrine on the bottom. I'm not going to say whether I agree with it or not, because I'll just tell you flat out, that may be our doctrine, but that's not what we do. It's a good place to start from, and then we deviate as needed, okay? But we still don't coordinate very well, even inside our joint talks right now. So if you have the functional assets, or functional elements, what does it mean to have SA? What do you kind of need as a baseline capability? What would you want to feed in, and how would you want to feed it in? But really, before you can even say, well, what all do I want, you got to kind of say, well, here's my minimum standards. Here's the things that I really got to have. So if you look at the big boxes, we talk about visualization, data storage, and sensors. Well, everybody thinks that SA comes from a common operating picture of a screen. It's about like this, and you look on it, and you can take a map, and you can put it on the wall, or you got a great big map. If you go to like a JSOC or something, and there's 5 or 6 of them, and you just walk around, and you can just see everything moving. Well, that is the feeds that you need, but that's not awareness. It's data or information. And really, information is the currency that we're talking about here. Data comes into it in the analytics. You see the analytics off to the side. Now, I heard some gentlemen mention this morning that they were really concerned about big data. I don't believe that. I'm not that concerned about big data. It's going to happen. Big data is happening. It's already, technology, the industry guys are already pushing us there, which is fine. That's exactly where we need to go. But what big data is not doing for us is telling me how to conduct analytics on it. So take, for instance, Microsoft stood up their own what's it called? They have their own, basically, tactical operations center now for looking at Windows and developing, understanding what their vulnerabilities are and working against criminals. They have an ongoing fight on their level against criminals. That's just hacktivists and other things, but it's really at the criminal base that they're working. So they kind of look at it in that perspective. Well, their analytics they run are tailored specifically for what they need to find on Windows. Well, your analytics, if you're a Linux person, it's a completely different set of analytics. Or if you're a Mac user, completely different set of analytics. So my point is, looking at data per se, data is the kernel, if you would. That's the very start of it. And then from there, information becomes the currency, but then the analytics becomes the engine of change. That's what really starts your change to understand, is how do I synthesize information, pull it together, make it relevant to a mission and an intent, give it to my plans guys, my planning, MDMP, the military decision-making process that we use everywhere, everyone uses it, and then put it into action. That's the big difference here. So one other thing on dissemination. Dissemination is not, hey, I put it on a website, and if you need it, you go find it. The way that we're looking at intelligence support for cyber and EW operations is push-pull. I should be able to look at what everyone's already gathered in the enterprise, and then that gets pushed to me, not stuck in a repository in a G2 section and just says, hey, this is, it's here if you need it, go to it and check it out. But that goes back to the staff and understanding. We talked about RFIs. What do I need to really know? And that becomes the push. And then the pull is I need to make sure that I've got my RFIs, my requests into the enterprise, and then it's going to flow back to me. People talk about data pruning just because there's so much information. Well, again, it's user-defined operational pictures. UDOP is what we call it. But it's really user-defined information flow. Okay, what do you really need to know, and at what level that you really need to be? All right, so awareness versus understanding. So I'll let you read this. The top is really the definition for situational understanding by the Army. We took situational awareness from a joint perspective, and we looked at it and said, well, I understand, but when you look at SA and its requirements, it's really technical. It wasn't really geared towards the commander and the intent and the mission set. So that's why we came up with situational understanding, and situational understanding would simply be like the next step. And then you got the discussion about insider wisdom. I'm like, okay, fine, not too worried about that. But the point is we get to the cognition and understanding from a human perspective, understanding really what the intent is in the guidance, okay? The big thing on the bottom, that warfighting culture, that's really our biggest challenge. It's because so many people still want to call the DODAN a service. And I just had but I had a very intense conversation with some of my Army G6 brethren not long ago in an event where we were trying to specify what we were buying for operations, cyberspace operations, and what we were buying as a business case or a business use from a CIO G6 perspective. And I listened to the G3 from Army Cyber Command talk about what they needed, and I listened to the G6 from headquarters talk about how they use the business model, and I said, it's just simply because you have a set of money and you have a set of money and you guys talk different requirements, but they're the same things. And that's really one of our biggest issues we have within all of the services. I'm being a former Navy officer, I'm very familiar with the Navy's, N2, N6, combining and the scar tissue from that. So I'm not advocating that at all at any point in time, but my point is you got to kind of look at this from a different perspective. It's the same stuff. We just use different languages. Sometimes it gets in our way. So Cyber SU, now this manual was the first manual that the Army developed to talk about situational awareness, if you would, cyber electromagnetic activities, which is electronic warfare, cyberspace operations, and EMS operations, spectrum operations, as a staff requirement. And that's really where it came from. It was the first doctrinal manual that really talked about, though, integrating cyberspace, electronic warfare, and spectrum inside the command posts and the tactical operations centers. So as you can see, it didn't fully define what cyber situational understanding was specific, because the Army uses just situational understanding as the overall commander's perspective, and then there's the aspects that cyber and electronic warfare and spectrum brings in. So it really talks about there at the bottom. Now, the banner at the bottom is really important to understand. Cyber electromagnetic activities is a integrating function that does not replace mission, soldiers, tactics, any of that other stuff that we do for cyberspace operations, electronic warfare. In other words, you will always have cyberspace operations, you will always have electronic warfare operations, you will always have spectrum operations. Cyber electromagnetic activities looks to make sure that we synchronize, deconflict, plan for, call for support, and provide commanders actionable actionable information that has been analyzed and synthesized, cognition. What's the real issue that we need for the mission? We called it mission assurance this morning. Well, we call it assured mission command in the Army. That's our big moniker, if you would. And that's what really cyber electromagnetic activities does for your SEMA. So this has changed a lot over the last couple of years. Why? Because whenever we kind of started this discussion a few years back, we didn't have the cyber mission forces. We were really we still had, before Cybercom even, we still had the JTFs, JTF GNO, JFCC, and W really doing a lot of that work, and we weren't talking about integrating yet. But over time, and we've been doing this type of work, this study and analysis has been ongoing since really 2008, and we've done it several times. We've got it to the point where we think we know what we need. So looking at this, you can see at the bottom here, the bottom is really key. The DODIN is our operational platform. And I know that if there's any G6 people in the room, or A6, I believe, I'm sorry if it offends you, but that's the bottom line. And that's where we have to start from. That's the understanding. So one of our biggest pushes in the Army is making sure that we educate our leaders. So we're working on our soldiers, our leaders, but we need to make sure that commanders understand this as the base. This is your platform. This is your operational platform that we start from. It integrates electronic warfare, cyber, signal, and intel, and you can't separate those. They're all intertwined in some way. I'm not saying that one replaces the other, but you cannot separate them and just try to concentrate on one area when you're looking at a platform like this. You can see the joint mission construct over here on the side for the around the different. These are your operational domains. Operational domains. The JFC missions you can see from that side. In the middle there, you talk about we having our actual actioning forces, and then over to the side, you really talk about having not only the joint side, but there's Army requirements for all of that aspect too, and how those are integrated. And at the very top, you can see kind of EW. The point of trying to show you this is that even though we have traditionally talked about them as separate entities, you can no longer do that. And that's really what's key due to this convergence that we've talked about. And I'm going to show you a slide at the end about operational convergence. With technical convergence is already happening. I already have capabilities that have multiple things that I can do with it, right? How many people use iPhone? Preferences on iPhone? Android? I'm an Android guy. I'm not too smart with the iPhone, and I don't like iTunes. So, I mean, that's kind of the point, is I can use it I can transmit, I can broadcast, I can receive, I can scan. How many people use their iPhones and their Androids to go into a local open area and turn on their Wi-Fi to scan to see how many people are not encrypted? I'm not saying I do that. Unless it's my wife or my kids or something, then I scan them all the time. So turn it off. You're not in the car. You don't need your Bluetooth on, and at least encrypt it or do something. So, but it's a full spectrum of capabilities in a handheld. The ability to call fires, the ability to call for support, the ability to exploit, miscommunicate. Just think about it, okay? And it's got access. So cyber situational understanding works across all of the warfighting functions. Now, in the Army, we call them warfighting functions. In the Navy, in the joint arena, they are joint functions, but they kind of line up with everything. except for mission command. Our mission command is just the joints version of command and control. So when you look over to the far side, these are the functions that are ongoing every day in every command post, every organization, every talk. This is how we work together as for common areas. So a warfighting function, if you're not sure, or a joint function, is really a grouping together of common areas. So like, let's talk about fires for a second. So the fires function has your fire support guys in there, your targeteers, your intel support for that aspect, and they work inside the command post in a working group about, the size of this room or whatever, however big it is, but they're all working in close proximity to each other, and they all understand that mission set and how to integrate it into all the rest of the warfighting functions. That's one thing that people don't really realize is one warfighting function cannot stand by itself. And even though the movement maneuver guys loved it, when I was in the Navy, it was the fighter guys. Oh yeah, that's the greatest thing since sliced bread. You can't do it without us. I was like, I'm sorry, I launched probably 200 or 300 more sorties into Kosovo than any fighter guy ever did. But the point was that was the mission set. So don't think of it as one function over another. Think of it how they will integrate with each other and be really, it's a symbiotic relationship on that stuff. But then also for cyber situational understanding, so cyberspace electronic warfare, electromagnetic spectrum crosses all the functions and is integrated in those functions. But what we don't understand yet is the integration, synchronization, and coordination piece. Those are really what we're missing. So that's what really SEMA brings you. And then as you can see over here, now I haven't really talked about it yet because we are building a cyber SA capability that supports cyber situational understanding. I don't need to build the new sensors. I don't need to go out and recreate I don't need to recreate any of those sensors. They're already there. We're already doing the intelligence support. We're already looking where we need to look. What we're not doing, though, is being able to share that, disseminate it, provide it to commanders. And that's really what we're trying to do. So I may have to go out there and build some new stuff in the future, but for right now, I'd be happy with anything that just will talk to me, will talk to the requirement, okay? So here you can see that, EWPMT, D6, WinT, that's what we've all moved towards, AFATIDs and something. But at the bottom is what really we want to aggregate and provide, is an ability to be able to display after we've analyzed, synthesized, deconflicted, and integrated into unified LAN so that I can show a commander, here's what the impact is for mission assurance or mission command. Okay. Now, again, there's going to be some stuff in the future we're going to have to build, but for right now, what we're saying is before we go building anything, we need to make sure that we can synchronize and integrate that information. That's the biggest issue right now, okay? So we had to, in order to write an ICD, initial capabilities document through the JSIDS process, again, let me back up. So I heard again, we got to get faster and got to get faster. And as I said before, this hopefully will be nothing more than software in the future, is what we would like to see it as, because we've already kind of built the hardware pieces all throughout the Army. There's going to be some changes that we'll need to do, and yes, you'll have to go through the JSIDS process of 2 to 5 years to get something built, but our Army has identified that as a shortfall, and we are working that around. Matter of fact, right now we've just got some movement to shorten the time frame for purchase of other, say, COTS, GOTS type things, build COTS or GOTS, and move it into the field, knowing that we're going to have a long-term sustainment piece coming to follow that up. In this operational view, what I want to specify here, or show you and depict from here, is that it integrates all of those warfighting functions that we talk about. So any Navy people in here? All right, so you look at the bottom, you see the undersea cable coming up. That's part of it. You can't get away from the fiber. The fiber attaches somewhere to a connection and then is rebroadcast. So that you got to think about it. But really, this shows or tries to depict the fact that you'll have reach back. You have CONUS and OCONUS operations and forces ongoing 24/7, 365, and it's not only cyber, but so there's an F-35 over there. It's really how do those data links talk, how and what are we doing with those assets. The fact that I have a data link on a 35 or a 22 or even an 18 or FA-18 now, I can broadcast. So why wouldn't I start looking to utilize them instead of just link 16 or an AFATIDS link to an aircraft? Is my point. So you got to look at there's multiple capabilities there, but only a small fraction of changes that we could do more with. The last point on this slide is at the bottom. We are very good at showing, okay, here's my, how many of you have seen The Matrix? That's even getting old now, isn't it? So you've seen The Matrix, and when you look at The Matrix, you got, you're seeing Neo and those guys running around and down in the, in the city and doing all their thing and shooting at everybody, and that's what a commander would want to see, right? And then you've got the actual operator sitting over here at the screen, and he's going, whoa, look at that. It's like, all it is stuff going up and down. You're like, okay, there's mumbo jumbo, but he can read it. So that's the differences that we're trying to talk about here is we need to be able to make sure that we can see how we are seen by others. That's really important because that's when you can get inside an enemy or an adversary's OODA loop. If you only see how you look, you're never going to get in their OODA loop. You're never going to get to the point where you're constantly ahead of them. And that's what the OODA loop's all about. Or, as an aviator, that's all we talked about. But that's really where we need to get. Right now, we're still, left of boom is the other way we say it. In the Army, we say left of boom, right? So we need to move further up into the chain, and the only way to do that is to be able to see how we are viewed by our adversaries, and that's really key. So we wrote the concept of operations for Cyber SA, and then we changed it to SU because we understood it really was about the commander and how they perceive what information we provide them as a staff and make decisions on. But this ConOps is really, and I don't think agnostic is the right term, but I'll use it. It's really agnostic of platform, as well as the user. And let me explain that a little bit. I'm not trying to provide the manna for the world on cyber, but the point is, I've used that a lot lately, but what we want to provide is something that can be used by anyone in the Army, whether they're a mission force, they're an electronic warfare officer, or they are a pure cyber planner. And then I want to make sure that I can define what they need specifically by echelon and by function and allow them to be able to go and get that information. So it starts all with the sensors. So data collection already happens, right? Don't we do that? We already do data collection. We do information collection. We do analysis and synthesization to put it into our intelligence process. Okay, so that's already ongoing. I don't need to change that. I just need to be able to change the access to it. So from that data collection, which was big data, what we talked about this morning, this is really this is the heart. This is the hardest part. That is what I actually do have to build as new. We don't have it. We have some niche capabilities to develop it, but we have to really do a better job of getting to the point where I can be more responsive in that build. So the analytics piece changes according to where you are, what your mission is, and what you're looking at. As I mentioned, Windows. Let's talk about Windows. They have a different requirement than I would for a Linux OS, right? So again, their analytics would be different. If I'm at a core and I need analytics, and I will, they will probably be looking a lot different than what I would need at a brigade, because core's huge, brigade's not that big, okay? But it's really our maneuver unit. That's really important. And so being able to filter and parse what is pushed and pulled becomes critical, because then I can get that data pruning that we talked about. If I get information overload, it's worse than having not enough information. Not enough information, I can at least make assumptions. Too much information, I'm sorting through weeds and chaff and trying to figure out what is really important. Awareness, output's really threat, network, and mission. That's the aspects you got to remember. And then from the left and right side, the left side is really our traditional Army units and how they operate. And the right side is all about the mission force and Army Cyber Command and what they do. So at the top you can see that this big data network view, that's what they're working. So in partnership with our the Cyber Center of Excellence, we're working together to build this. We have some ideas. We know what we do know what we need. It's the how do we get there point that we're working together. We've got some contract folks that are supporting us too up at Aberdeen and the Cyber Focal and a few other people that are really kind of concentrate on this. We have a task force ongoing. That's really kind of big for us that we stay involved so that we're all talking the same point. You can see at the bottom there are some ideas and I would say that this is a requirement. JIE, Joint Information Environment, is a requirement. It's mandated by DoD. The Army has instantiated the common operating environment and some documents that we will ride on. So we kind of got some guidance. We're working on those. Over in the left side, the command post computing environment has been designated as the future command post delivery vehicle, if you would, or platform. Okay, so this is the Icd strategy. The takeaway from this is there's more than enough documents out there for any service in DoD, period, to build or write whatever they need to without writing another Icd. All right? So I keep hearing people say, well, we got to get inside that JSIDs, we got to shorten that down. I'm like, no, you don't. Figure out how to do the less than 24-month development cycle other than QRC, because what happens to QRC? How many QRCs end up in a program of record? Very seldom. I've seen two from INSCOM actually that went, but out of the other 30, they all got dropped. And that's one of our biggest issues about JSIDs that I agree with. Everything doesn't need to be JSIDs. Everything doesn't need to be QRC, or even inside a JUONS or an ON statement in a 24 to 48 hour cycle. You need all three of those types of acquisitions. We have the JSIDs. We have a QRC. What we don't have is something that I can turn in 24 to 48 hours as a requirement, because I don't have the bandwidth of folks, capabilities, and authorities and money to spin it that fast. If it's a government thing, we can do some of that stuff, but it's very niche on what we're doing. So the way we attacked this was in phases. So phase one was we reviewed all of the joint documents, the joint cyber SA ICD, the joint attack ICD, the land war net name mission command ICDs from the Army, and several of them. And then we wrote the requirements in order to understand what cyber situational awareness and understanding is, we wrote a concept of operations that was geared towards explaining that. Lots of people didn't understand, okay, what is understanding or awareness? Well, there's a specified difference between the two. So we wrote this concept of operations. General Fogarty just recently approved that, and it's out for user pack review right now for an endorsement. That should be coming out here pretty soon. It'll give you the understanding, but it really talks about the technical aspects inside the commander's intent, and it comes from the commander's perspective. So from that, we started writing this document, right, to get the capability built. Well, from there, that capability document doesn't really tell you how to use it. The first one tells you what it is and how it's employed in a TOC, and then we wrote a second ConOps right now that just went out for AO level staffing. It's on SIPRNet, but it talks about how to integrate the different solutions for cyber and EW that came out of the 2013 Cyber Capabilities-Based Assessment, using the Cyber SA ConOps, SU ConOps, to understand what it is, having the assumptions are having those capabilities then in the field. Now we have to say, how do we use them integrated across unified land operations? So that CSCB, it's really called Cyber Support to Core and Below, CSCB. That's really what we're writing here. And it talks about taking that understanding and integrating it into the unified land scheme and maneuver, having our traditional echelons that have staffs that understand what that is, but then also having units on the field that have the joint titles and authorities needed to exercise to support our tactical maneuver linked to the enterprise, the joint enterprise capabilities. So intel, electronic warfare, and cyber both have a purple aspect and they have a green aspect. And we're trying to make sure that we can pull those two together, okay? And this is kind of the statement at the bottom, was really where we talk about supported by an expeditionary cyber and EW unit, which is one of the solutions that we had put together. Point was, we couldn't build, everybody can't have their own F-35 in a brigade, even, or that capability set, my point. So there's going to be some places where we will give every unit protective EA capabilities or something like that, like a Duke or a crew and that kind of stuff. But that's not true. That's one aspect of EW, and you can't think of that as EW. It's really more defensive EA. We should be able to use that, though, for sensors, by the way, if you think about it. So we want to have a unit that can provide more of the robust capabilities. That's really an extension from Joint Task Force Cyber through the core and into brigade scheme and maneuver, really supporting from the core. And that's what that ConOps talks about. This is kind of what it would look like. So we were building this capability. We're going to provide it to the staffs and the commander. The dashboard you can see talks about if you've ever flown or done electronic warfare missions, you should recognize the circles and some of the other stuff. That's typically what we use for, electronic warfare. That's where my background started. And then using special electronic attack capabilities, it grew into understanding more of the IP-based requirements. But if you take that dashboard, you need to be able to do models in SIM. Any model in SIM, folks? Okay, so that's another issue we have in the world is we just don't have enough model and SIM folks, truthfully. But the point is we have to do it. And that means I used to be able to do planning and actually shape and show my mission even to my commander and be able to make changes based on his guidance. And then again, the big thing to take away from this is that they need to be common reference maps. Air Force uses one, Marine Corps uses one, Navy uses one, we use one, Army, and none of us talk to the Coast Guard about maps. Everybody thinks of, well, that's in the water. Well, guess what? They use maps too, right? So how do we get there? This is our biggest issue, and I would say that this is DoD. Why? Because we all have a primary mission set. We all have an understanding of larger scaled operations. Kinetic discussions, lethal discussions no longer hold sway to the norm. In my opinion, and the way that we look at it, we could basically get rid of those terms, lethal, non-lethal, kinetic, non-kinetic, because I can prove to you that we are able to do both with cyber and electronic warfare capabilities. Now, I'm not saying that we need to. I know that there was a journal document. A journal came out recently with an Army officer that said, if we had more of these cyber and EW units in there, you wouldn't even have to put the battalion on the ground. And I will just tell you flat out that that's wrong. And we've had that conversation inside the Army that that's probably not the best way to say things. What we need to say is it would be extremely complementary and would most definitely save and support and protect our soldiers, airmen, Marines, and sailors. That's the way it works. Okay, so you're always going to have someone with an M4 in their hand to win on the ground. It's just the way it is. That means you got to have the other guys. We have to be as a team synchronized, and not just having the traditional domains as like we talked about the JFAC. I used to go to the JFAC every day. I know what it does, and I was always comfortable with the JFAC. But then we started putting cyber in the JFAC, and I was instantly kind of like, well, I don't think that's probably going to work so well. It's working to an extent, but my point is we got to kind of figure out how to do it better. This is what's really critical. If we don't understand the DODN as our bottom line, that's what starts everything, and that's from that platform. From that platform, we can take the initiative, and that's really what DCO and OCO is. It's taking the initiative after you've been able to dominate that platform. That's really what you got to take away from, okay? And it's really operations. Combined arms is how we talk about it. So we have, you have joint operations. Very few times do we actually deploy by ourselves or do things by ourselves as an Army. We always have someone there with us. That's combined arms. All right, so in convergence. And this is my last slide that I want to talk about, because it really, one of the things, if we can understand what it means to integrate all of those other capabilities, and then the staffs are trained and understand how to synchronize that based on the commander's intent and guidance, and we have those other units that are synchronized through the higher headquarters requirements supporting the ground units, we have to be able down at our command posts and our tactical operations centers, we have to be able to give those people the opportunity to do that, and right now we're not doing it. That means, so most of our signal regiment does not have a top secret clearance because they didn't operate there. Okay, now they're going to take over the JWIC's accounts and how to manage that system. They're going to need access. They have to have the clearances. Our electronic warfare officers, not all of them are TS. Okay, they're going to be operating a lot of capabilities that reside only at that level or at the SAP level. Right now, we have a very small section in our command post where the G2, S2 intelligence folks work that's skiffed. Well, that's fine if you're an intel person, but how do I get the intel out of the intel operations cell in the back up to the G3 who doesn't have access to top secret information? Well, it's kind of hard. So we're moving from this post, I would actually call it a Cold War, it's not even post, it's a Cold War type mentality of our command post. That's exact. You look at it right now, we still use the Napoleonic nomenclature for where people go, but yet we work and synchronize around the warfighting functions. And so it's kind of a, which one are you? Well, the point is it's okay if it works, but we need to change this so that in the future I'm not having to make it really hard on my soldiers. So going to the center, you're talking about a common operating environment. So command posts of the future, I know it's an Army program, and I know people don't like it whenever I say it, but we're way past that now. We need to move towards a center where we talk about having this common operating environment. Instead of buying a box, it actually has its own operating system to put information in. And you guys ever heard of swivel seat? What did I say? That's swivel seat, right? It's a complete swivel seat situation right now with us on this situation, and it makes it really hard for us. In the common operating environment, we'll get rid of that. Okay, we'll have this unified data cloud, this cloud data at the bottom. Unified data is where we want to go. We will have moved our systems into a common set of transport layers, common stacks, brought all that stuff together, and in the end, or where we would like to see kind of our end state, is a single tactical operations center or command post where everyone works at the TS-SCI level. It's a JSOC model. It's exactly what happened. It is the JSOC model. If you ever read General Stan McChrystal's blogs, he actually just recently put out a really good article on what it looks like to have that. And it doesn't mean having more screens. It means having feeds and synchronization, and everyone can talk and be in the same room with themselves or with their counterparts to talk about what they're doing. That's really the transformational piece for us. That's convergence, when I take and put us all in the same room and I can actually allow them to interact routinely. Okay? So what I try to prevent, I'm going to open it up for questions here, but what I really try to provide you was, this is a human aspect. Technology's already happened. We can do it. It's the policies, it's the training, the leader development situation, it's the access pieces, it's the laws, the regulations. Those are the big things I got to change. And by the way, I've got to build an analytics engine that'll work at different levels and layers according to what it's doing. But that's really the big key. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions. Go ahead. There's a mic if you want to stand up here. If you just want to scream, that's fine too. I can't, yeah.
I guess my question is, so Amazon, for instance, already knows, like, if I buy razors on there, they already know. They're like, hey, you want to buy some shaving cream or whatever it associates with that.
Yeah.
Is there any sort of tool similar to that for the Intel guys, like that you guys use? You know, you see, hey, this guy bought fertilizer, 2 tons of it. Yeah. We're going to...
Right. So the answer is yes. And I think every service has that. There's a myriad of different tools that we use. They look very different between services because we all have a different aspect because of our operational environment, right? Except for when you get up to like NSA and U.S. Cyber Command, those intelligence support pieces are very geared specifically to enterprise level, and then the amount correlation is huge. Not only correlating, but then aggregating. So as the enterprise of intelligence continues to churn 24/7, 365, that's where it becomes so incumbent to make sure that you have put in, as an analyst, say if you're an Intel analyst, you put in the specific requirements for that mission set based on the commander's intent, and then you provide it. So yes, the tools do exist. We still have to build new analytics, though, to do that, because correlation doesn't always happen. For example, when you look at, when you're trying to correlate traditional information about a network based on where it is and who it belongs to, we actually saw this not long ago in our cyber. We were like, well, why is that anomaly constantly happening on the 25th of that month? And nobody was saying, well, because the operation had already happened, but it happened again later. And we were like, why? Okay, here's the second month, it did it again. Why did we do that? Why did it do that? And we go back and we said, well, we don't have any analytics to look at it. That's when we actually had our computer scientists sit down right quick, and literally within like probably an hour and a half, 2 hours, they had a skeleton, and then they had the command and control of it, and they built an analytic to say, look at this, and then has a different perspectives. And less than a day later, what we found out was a beaconing. But it wasn't something that we had seen before, but it was geared to. It was actually hardwired into the motherboard. So be careful where you buy your laptops. Is the point. Does that answer your question? Well, so awareness would be, awareness is I saw that information and I put it together in a package and I provided it to a staff member. In this case, understanding did not occur because we didn't have a tool to support greater depth and analysis. We said, hey, the operation was successful. I don't know why I keep getting this hit back when it doesn't make sense because it's not going anywhere, but it constantly beacons. And it's beaconing to no one. It's just going off and there's no receiver. Well, why wouldn't there be something there? And then they said, okay, well, it was just hardwired. That's why we have to be able to, so that's real true understanding is I'm able to take the awareness piece, give it to what we need to do to conduct mission. So I got the mission done, but there was still a requirement to follow up on that mission. The second part of that is making sure you have those tools and analytics and the ability to turn that quickly to develop that full understanding. Okay. Next question? Yes, ma'am. Come on. Come on, Bob.
So, considering our resourcing issues across the DoD and the fact that you need to be a military member to conduct certain cyber operations, what would you think about the possibility of outsourcing some of DoD ops?
Well, that's a good question. So, I'll give you a little scar tissue from our learnings over the years of fighting constant wars. We did that. We ended up coming towards the end of the war having spent any of our future requirements on what we had in the field already with huge amounts of field support specialists to be able to run our missions, run our networks. Now, that was good because we got the mission done, right? That's just the way we had to do it in order to conduct the operation. There was just no way we could get past that. And then we got rid of our FSRs and we said, okay, Signal Regiment, you guys are going to run it again, so back to you now. And instantly we said, okay, where's our support? And stuff started falling off the plate. We've kind of overcome that. We've worked back. We're still shorthanded, in my opinion. I would never advocate for a full contracting out of a capability. I believe that what you end up with sometimes, and not because anybody would do this really intentionally, but people will always come from their perspective. So some of the things that I was actually reading in the earlier discussions was like bug identification, some of the paying for looking for specific malware, that type of stuff. I don't think that's bad because I think you can contract that stuff to actually do it. Now the issue with the government is that we look at that as it could be a deliverable, but in the Army regulations for contracting and the legal reviews, they'll say that's a service. So it's either a service contract or you hire a government guy to do it. Well, you can't hire enough government people to run the government. That's just the bottom line because we can't afford it. And truthfully, I don't want to. I want new people. I want new contractors coming to the table. I want young people as well as people like me and even older. I have a little bit of everything. Everybody doesn't need to be 24 or 22 years old and less and be a constant hacker and just be on it because their leadership probably ain't going to cut it. And their ability to synthesize and understand is definitely not going to cut it because they're really good at taking care of this code and writing this code. But why am I making them do it? So I think that is an opportunity that the DoD needs to look at, and they need to take the action, not the services just yet, but our senior leaders in the DoD need to look at that and say, how could Air Force is looking for this malware, they're looking for this malware, Marines are doing this malware, why wouldn't I, at the DoD level, say, I'm going to contract out support for my services to do that search. And some of that could happen. I still think you'll always need to do a lot of your own analytics at whatever echelon you're at in order to meet that requirement. Is that good? Awesome.
Sir, good morning.
Good morning.
As we increase the size of our network at the tactical edge, especially with the implementation of more of the IP-based radio systems in our WinT architecture, right. And as we bridge those systems into the overall DoD network and start really connecting everything through our mission command systems, how do we address the security and cyber defense aspects in an environment where cyber is not included in our traditional planning process, and where at the tactical level, especially in the BCTs and the infantry division environment, where we don't have that subject matter expertise or potentially the focus on cyber that we should?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would like to say that we fixed it, but we haven't, and we're not going to fix it anytime soon, and I'll explain to you a little why. we've been on a campaign. So the Cyber Force Modernization proponent has been on a campaign since 2008 to educate the Army on just what you said, how to integrate those requirements down into the brigade. We struggled with electronic warfare, and then now we're struggling with cyber, but we're doing it for different reasons. And it's gotten a lot better. We actually have demand signals now. That's the biggest. So when we talk about everything from the enterprise DODIN all the way down to the rifleman's radio, that is DODIN. What we haven't really wrestled with yet is what I do once I get below the Regional Cyber Center or down to even at the ESB level, Expeditionary Signal Brigade, Battalion, excuse me, as to what we do and then how I would do anything different as an S6 in a maneuver brigade. Now, we're doing those operations, and we're moving, and we're building those TTPs, but we haven't linked them up yet. From my perspective, we need to be able to do that a little bit. That's something that we are trying to work on down at Fort Gordon in the Cyber Center is how do I better link those together? And when I say we're trying to do it through some of these concepts and concept of operations. In our schoolhouses now, we talk a little bit more about cyber and EW integrated. But the other part of that, as I showed you, so I found my laser, by the way, it was in my pocket. And then I dropped it and broke it. There we go. When you're talking, this is where we're at today over here, and this is what you're really getting at, right? So to move from this to this, one, I have to give them access. I have to be able to give them training, because access doesn't do you any good. And that was one of the things I was trying to say earlier about I've got to be able to rapidly buy tools. Well, if I'm not turning tools every 3 to 4 months in a brigade, just how little training are you really doing on it? You're doing a single shot point use, and then you're forgetting about it and moving point, and that doesn't work for us down in the traditional Army echelons. JSOC, got it. They can do whatever they want to, but here we have to train better. We have to train our guys, our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that it may be an enterprise level capability, but it's got to be used at a tactical level for effects and support. And especially defense. The defense piece is huge. I haven't even talked really about defense yet because we're not there yet to be able to talk and understand when I say defense, other people may think that's protection. Okay, different perspectives, but we're working on it. It's going to happen. With the cyber commandant standing up down there, we're working on that a lot. Trying to get the schoolhouse some capability. We've got a couple of programs where we go out with mobile training teams to teach the Army Leaders Cyberspace Operations course, which has just been done the second time. We did it at 75th Ranger Regiment. And the Ranger guys, they were a different breed. We did it with a conventional force up front, but the Ranger Regiment really cemented where we need to go. It showed us, because we actually were on the floor where they were doing operations, and we were seeing, our instructors went down there and watched what was happening and saw it, and saw how everybody was in the same room, and they could talk. And just because someone was sitting here and they had a TS clearance screen up working, and the person next to them had a SIPR screen up, there wasn't like this, blinders in between them or a skiff around that one guy. They all had the same access. That's really what's key, but also being able to understand what that means. So we're going to get there. It's going to take us probably a while in your lifetime. I'm hoping it'll happen, and we're moving on it. So, but again, to what we've gotten done so far, but we're way behind, in my opinion. We're working it. So, any other questions? Anything else? Okay, well, I want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak to the San Antonio area and AFCEA for allowing me to come down and speak. On behalf of Major General Stephen Fogarty, who's the Cyber Center of Excellence Commanding General, I just would like to say thank you very much. We actually do our own large AFCEA events down at Fort Gordon. I think it's once a year, twice a year. Once a year. Last year we did it twice. This year's once. And it really is geared towards the Army, but we definitely invite all of our sister services and civilians, the DOD and the rest of the folks. Industry, AFCEA is the lead for it. They will be coming down there working with us on what we're going to talk about. And I believe this next event is really going to talk about the cyber and EW fighting combined arms. So it would give you a little bit better perspective on how our service looks at integration requirements and then training. So just your point a while ago, how do I train and get my force to be able to understand how to use it and then provide it to the commander? So again, thank you very much for everyone. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right, how many guys are actually here for continuing education credits? Nobody? Yeah, I'm kidding. Who am I? I've been at Vormetric for a couple of years. Former Army. I've done that I did that for about 6-7 years. Shut down Panama. Did some work over at Fort Detrick. Hoosier born and raised. So I'm cheering for these guys over in the NCAA tournament. And this is a view from a place about 5 miles from my house. So I'm over from the East Coast. So I get to get home to that. So what are we going to talk about? So when the guys asked me to talk about enterprise security, I had to do a lot of research and figure out, number one, what's really going on, just in terms of from an IA perspective. I'm going to talk about some of the trends and some ways to protect some of your mission data. So we're also going to talk about what the really big idea is about changing the face. It's not as big as you think it is. It's just a new technique to protect your data. We're going to give you a little operational context. We're going to talk about some ways we can help, and then after about 45 minutes or so, I'll open it up for Q&A. So who got their OPM letter? Oh, you guys did. I got mine too. Was actually working with those guys on a program to protect that data. And before the breach, we had talked about how sensitive those records were. And they said, well, Eric, we've already, we're compliant. We've already got self-encrypting drives. We have policy that says, hey, if you're an administrator, you shouldn't walk out with this data. And we've got stuff on the endpoint, so I think we're okay. Hundreds of millions of dollars later, you're not okay, right? So you get that letter. The other piece is, and so a lot of you guys know this, is that the number of cyber threats, depending on, well, regardless of where you're actually measuring it, it's actually going up. So if you measure it at the White House, if you measure it in the Air Force, if you measure it in Fed Civilian, if you measure it in the intelligence community, all of that data is going up, right? So all those attacks are going up. So you have to understand, even though we may have compliant solutions, why are the number of attacks actually increasing and not decreasing? So at a high level, so I'll point out this piece right here, it's the social media, the social engineering aspect of getting data access, right? So it's more than just some guys trying to, quote unquote, hack a network. They're making attacks look like the things that we do every single day, right? And I'll show you some examples here as we go by, but the main point is it's getting really, really harder to distinguish what is legit and what is malicious. And so when you look at that, in light of that, there are some other protections that you have to involve. From a financial standpoint, this is just one measure of it. So these guys are spending, just on the remediation piece, right? Not on the protection, the remediation piece. This is after the fact. These guys are spending close to $500 million if you measure it across a lot of commercial companies to remediate it, right? So you remember the Target breaches. You remember the Sony breaches. So these guys were, quote unquote, compliant, but after data was exfiltrated, they spent a bunch of money, frankly, a bunch of money that they didn't really have or didn't plan on spending in order to protect their data, right? And so there's got to be a better way to do that in light of putting a check in the box and saying, well, we've measured enough risk. So here's a sample social media place, right? So a couple things that you want to look at. So this is how, so I'm going to walk you through how malware actually starts to get into your system and how that starts to, and one thing that it actually does, and we'll talk about where it protects it. The first piece is, so you have friends. So there's malware out there that impersonates your friends list on Facebook and then says, hey man, take a look at this video. It's really cool. You click on it, instantly you have malware, right? So there's one method. So I also get the question from two perspectives. The first one is, I have parents, right? So your parents say, okay, come take a look at this. This looks legit. I'm going to click on it. Oh my God, it's not. The other piece, I have kids. I have 2 teenage boys that click on anything that passes by, and so you have to teach them, hey, don't click on everything. That part gets, that increases your risk of infiltration in your network. Same thing with private messages. Hey, click here. Send me some money or help me out, take a look at this video. Those are the things that we normally do, but there's just 5 degrees of separation between that and something that gets into your network. So if you concatenate everything up, number one piece for social media, malware injection, jacking, and something through your email address is publicly available. So there's lots of information that can be collected, build something in context, and then make it look like something legit. So here's something that so I have a couple teenage boys, and so they use Snapchat a lot, right? And so Snapchat itself got infiltrated because they were spoofed a message from their CEO. They figured out just their writing style, and boom, that was it. And so now there's no remediation on anything that they put onto social media that gets into their networks, right? And so that's the same thing whether it's inside of a network, or outside of your network. So here's a nice fish attack. So this isn't the run-of-the-mill, hey, I'm some guy in Nigeria and I've got $10 million to move out of the country, right? So the threats have evolved past that. This actually looks very legit, right? So this is something that you get from a college that says, hey, you're kind of out of your limit. Click here to fix this, right? So that's usually the main piece. And even the URL looks legit, right? I mean, it's what it looks like. But if you arrow over it, it goes somewhere else, right? It goes somewhere completely different. This was something for your tax return. So this is something my mother actually got, and she said, well, wait a minute. I remembered what you said earlier about not clicking on anything that I didn't sign up for, right? So I didn't do my tax return, so why am I getting something from the IRS? So I said, well, don't do it. Just delete the email, leave it alone. So, and to their credit, the IRS says we don't send you anything like that, right? But there's a difference between what's broadcasted and what someone does operationally. So it's not just malware infection that gets into your network. I discovered this morning. I'm researching it. Out of all you guys in the audience, there's 2 or 3 of you that would sell your credentials right now for a lot of money, right? So if you think about some young airman, some young private, $1,000 would be a lot of money, and that's how much in this study someone would sell their credentials for. So these are legitimate email credentials inside of a network that is for sale. So we have to understand the nature of the threat that we're facing. So, did my clicker? I think my clicker died. So let's understand where we're at. So I'm a big football fan, and this was about 10 or 11 years ago. This was Mike Jones and Kevin Dyson. These guys trying to go down and win the Super Bowl. They had this was their last drive. Their seconds ticking off the clock. Guy makes the catch, and he goes down, and he is 1 yard short. Right, and there's a bunch of disappointment in his face. He was this close. From a cyber operational perspective, we're about that close too. These guys are doing a lot of good work. I've been around I've been exposed to a lot of different government agencies that are doing a lot of work to protect their data, and they're about that close, right? So you're training the cyber warriors. You're doing the quick responses. There's a lot of innovation and a lot of technology that you already deployed, right? So the endpoint devices, there's a lot of work going on there. From the server perspective, there's built-in security controls that are starting to be deployed. You got it now? Okay. Oh, okay, thanks. So from that perspective, we really want to take a look at that last mile or that last yard when it comes to protecting data. So understanding the nature of the threat, I'm a child of the 80s. I grew up, I loved the A-Team. Okay, anybody remember that? So just about every episode ended the same way. There was something that needed to be done, right? You had to storm a compound in order to get something, right? And so they built up this great big wall, and what would the A-Team do? They would do something that no one expected, right? And so this was a whole montage the whole time. You had BA building something, Face was off doing something, Hannibal was building a plan that would come together. And so the net is they would always take the enemy by surprise because no one expected them to try to ram into the wall and try to rescue whoever they were trying to rescue. And that's a good point to remember as you start to look at how you protect your networks. The ways that people try to infiltrate your networks are always going to be asymmetrical, right? So It's never going to be the latest round of virus attacks. It's never going to be the latest version of malware. It's going to be something that we are not expecting. And so since it's something we're not expecting, we have to look at different ways to protect what's really important. One thing to consider is these guys aren't just trying to breach the network and then they're turning around and then they're leaving, right? On the A-Team, they never blew up the wall and said mission accomplished, turned around and left. What are they after? They're after your data. They're after your PII. They're after your ISR data. They're after anything that they think or you think is important. So now you have to start to protect that. So now if you follow a path of malware, what's the first thing that happens? You start to escalate privileges. And I've done a lot of deployments, and one thing that we never talk about in IT, everything that we install is installed with elevated credentials, right? So if any Windows admins look at this, we see this all the time. We try to install something, it doesn't work, and then we go, oh, wait. I was supposed to install this as administrator. You right-click, run it as administrator, it works. Same thing on Linux. You right-click, run it as root, it works. It's perfect. So everything you install, from your apps to your OSs, to your storage, to your networking, all that's done with elevated credentials. And so when we look at what happens when malware now starts to enter your network, the first thing it does, it starts to elevate credentials. It starts to become your root, becomes your sysadmin, it becomes those credentials, and now it wants to take a look at what's going on in your network in order to see what they can find. Where is your sensitive data? Because no one watches root, no one watches your systems administrators to see what kind of access they have. We just say, well, we just tend to accept the fact that, well, your sysadmins have access to everything in your environment. So here's an example of some malware. So it's called Potato. So I'll pull this from Black Hat. First thing it does, elevate your privileges in your Windows environment. So now your Windows admins can go out and see everything. It is not just limited to Windows. Here's an example of a root exploit, a Linux exploit that elevates your credentials, maps out anything in your environment, and starts to take data. So here it is, just look at it. So when you start to do more than one thing, so your requirements grow, so the more this happens, you start to look at anything you deploy in your environment, it's deployed with elevated credentials, malware gets into your environment, they're trying to get those credentials, and no one is watching it. No one's watching it all together. So if you look at this just from a big picture, you have these little pockets, and so these guys talked about it here the past couple of days. You have these little silos of excellence that's all been installed with root, and so what happens is you see a requirement, you spend some money, you get a guy, you train a guy, you buy some stuff, it takes time. It's never serial. You have another requirement for another piece of technology. You list a requirement, you bid on the requirement, you get some money, you get a guy, you deploy it. Over and over and over and over and over again, what happens is none of this stuff works together. It's all in serial, it's not in parallel, and it gets really, really hard, it gets really, really complex, and it's tough to back out because you got a guy, and you got to train that guy, and there's not a lot of guys that can do that stuff that you need to do, so his costs go up. Right? And so where you want to be is you really want to start to commoditize how you protect your data in your environment. So ideally, this is what your ConOps looks like, right? So anything that's been ATO'd, any program of record says, if you're a user, here is the application that you should use in order to get to your data. And if you are a systems administrator, you shouldn't look at that data. Okay, because you're not read on. But there are no controls short of identity and access management that really looks at what a root user is doing. From an insider threat perspective, those guys that are selling their credential for $1,000, there's nothing watching them to see what they're actually doing. And then below the stack, there's nobody looking at the hypervisor administrator that says, well, what happens if you take a snapshot of a VM and walk out the door? From a storage perspective, well, what happens if someone clones a drive and walks out? What happens if it gets replicated and a key is applied and nothing happens? So operationally, worked with a lot of guys in AppSpace, worked with a lot of guys over at NORAD. a lot of guys here in San Antonio with the AFL, CNC, H&Y. I think they're on the right track, right? So instead of just gigantic program of record to go, hey, we're going to solve this problem, it's going to take us 5 years, and you're going to spend millions of dollars, what can we prove in a very short amount of time that'll make us 1% better? And how can we start to iterate that over and over and over again, and just to get incrementally better and a lot cheaper, right? The big piece is defensive cyber operations. How do you go back to that, that first slide where I looked at every single silo? How do you start to look at that in operational context and figure out where your sensitive parts are in your data, right? Moving beyond your network, well, all right, you're spending a lot of money, doing a lot of time, making a lot of investments to protect your network, but there are also other sensitive assets in your environment that we're not really paying a lot of attention to, right? And so the main point is you want to start to operationalize this the same way the Air Force does some of the other domains like air and space. So based on all of that, how can I actually help? So the answer is you want to start to look at a platform. You want to look at something that's rapidly deployable that can hit a host of different requirements across the widest technological platform that you can address, right? There will always be technical outliers, but you want to look for, if you want a consultating number, you want to get to the 80 or 90% solution. And then for that specialty, there's where you spend your money, okay? That's the part that commoditizes it. That's the part that makes your picture a lot bigger, okay? So where my company, Vormetric, actually sits in the stack is right here on your operating system. Doesn't interfere with anything else above it, doesn't interfere with anything else below it. There's a piece that I'll talk about later on that shows anything that you have deployed now, there's a pretty good chance that we don't interfere with it right now, right? As a matter of fact, we probably work with a lot of these guys that you're using to deploy a lot of your stuff today, either from an application perspective, from a network perspective, or from a storage perspective, or from a continuous monitoring perspective, okay? That's important because you really just want to protect your data. And your data is important regardless of the format that it sits in. It can be structured, it can be semi-structured, it can be unstructured, okay? So architecturally, we only have two components. Pretty simple. This could be set up today. First component is a hardware appliance that sits on your network, but it's not on the network path. You just use that to configure how your data is accessed. Second piece is a lightweight agent that sits on your file system. That file system can be physical or virtual, okay? Let me go back, push the wrong button. This communication is over Suite B. So now that we have an agent here, well, what do? So two components. The first one is encryption at rest. That part's pretty simple. So that's first thing you're going to do is encrypt your data. All right, you see guys in here that say, we have to encrypt everything. Well, the encryption part's really easy, right? You can get encryption from a lot of different vendors today. You can get encryption native to your OS, okay? But the difference is now you take encryption of any object that you have in your environment, and now let's start to wrap some policy around it. Some policy around it that says, okay, based on who you are and how you start to access that data, a decision is made whether or not you see that data in the clear. The first piece that you want to address is those guys that had elevated privileges, the guys that install everything with root and sysadmin privileges. Well, you don't need root access to run a backup, or you don't need root access to apply a patch. You shouldn't need root access to change configuration, right? So in your environment, the only thing they really need to do is see metadata, right? So let's protect that. The only time, so let's match your ConOps. The only time when someone needs to see your data in the clear is if you meet policy. So you guys know how you access your data. Your ConOps says, thou shalt use this application. Well, how do you enforce that? Well, here's how you enforce it. Okay, so you're authorized, let's follow this path. You're authorized users, and now the chain becomes your authorized user using an authorized group that you map to whatever your directory service is. And now let's add another component to it says only this application is allowed to see data in the clear. That part's easy. If you're an authorized user and you use another application that's not defined, well, that part's blocked. All that's done in real time. So now you start to see logs that say, Eric tried to use SharePoint to see this data when he really should have used Adobe. That's the real-time stuff that you need to see in your environment to address the nature of the threat, okay? Let's even hash this application that says, okay, if there's a change to that application, and that's how malware gets injected into your environment, that's the first thing it's going to do is detect a change. When that's done, you'll want to see a notification that says, well, wait a minute, this version of SharePoint is not the version of SharePoint that I'm expecting to see access to the data. So if that's the case, you want to block that, okay? Anyone else, anywhere else that you stick your data, no one should have access to it, okay? So if you're hosting it in Amazon, or if you're hosting it in another facility within the Air Force, no one else should have access to it. Take advantage of the infrastructure, take advantage of the economies of scale, but you control, if you're a data owner, if you're a program of record, you know how your data is supposed to be accessed. So usually when I talk to a lot of clients and prospects, the first question we get is, well, Eric, this sounds pretty good, but we already have PKI. We already have self-encrypting drives. We already do that. Thanks for coming. And I go, well, here's what you really have with the self-encrypting drive. You're protecting the guy from walking out, right? So when we looked at how data is being exfiltrated, you don't see a lot of people doing the B.A. Baracus, driving into a data center, putting some hooks onto a storage array, dragging that out. You don't see a guy putting a couple of drives in his pocket and starting to walk out, right? So the part's important, but you have to address your threat with the remediation. And usually doing a self-encrypting drive helps out, doesn't solve the whole problem. You need to abstract a couple of layers up to make sure anything inside the file system is protected, okay? And that's where we sit. All right, so how do we do that? So if you look at just a nice little chart here, we do it at the file system level and not on the network, right? So there's not data in motion, right? There's lots of tools and techniques that you use that we work with, let you do data in motion, okay? Pretty simple stuff. So now let's start to take a look at policy, okay? So policy is a set of rules that determine how you access your data. So if you're an authorized user into this directory, you define who, what, the resource, so it could be down to the file type, right? If I log in and I'm not supposed to look at any PDFs, but Excel documents I can look at, that part's fine. There is a time component in there as well. So if you can't, so from an operational standpoint, you go Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. If there's an access request at 2 o'clock on a Saturday, well, that doesn't match your operational context, so let's block that, okay? If you're someone else that is not authorized, and that's based on the rule that you set, if you can't see that data, if you're not authorized to see the data, it's going to be blocked. That's going to be logged over to a SIM tool. And just like I talked about earlier, if you're a root user, you have no reason to see your data. It's going to be blocked. So when people start to get it and they go, oh, okay, Eric, this is actual file system encryption. I get it's different from encrypting at a storage layer, but we've tried that before, and it really slows down my application. So what I had to do, so what I ended up having to do was tell my IA guys I needed an exception because this part is going to slow my application down, and I need to run my mission. So please give me an exception. This is how it works. And I go, well, yep, I understand that, so let's test it out. So let's go back to that rapidly advanced testing. So if you've deployed any kind of hardware over the past 7 or 8 years, Intel's got a chipset that does hardware acceleration for crypto operations. We take advantage of that. It's called AES-NI. So what that means is anything that's bound to, that has a crypto operation on it, it's offloaded onto that chip. And so what that means is for any kind of data set, structured or unstructured, usually at around 70% CPU, you're going to see about 2 to 3% overhead, right? So that's going to, that's me averaging it out. So I've seen it a lot lower. So I've seen it less than 0.5% of overhead. And I've seen it in gigantic compute clusters where it's around 8 or 9%. So depending on the data type, your mileage is going to vary. 2 to 3% is usually our sweet spot, right? So you get your AES-NI chipset in there. We've done lots of tests with Intel, we release stuff every year around this time of year. That's because of the big RSA conference. Not a big performance hit in file system encryption using Vormetric. Big piece, so this is how. So this was a configuration that I actually ran for an Air Force PLC. So there was a flight that came over. So these guys went around, they collected data. Okay, so one group of people could use the actual collection tool. So they went and collected data, and then went to a group that could actually analyze it. Okay, so we wrote a policy that says if you're an analyst, the only way you see this is you have to use your analytic tool to crunch your data. Okay, once the flight landed, once the pass landed, they had a bunch of systems administrators that wanted to transfer it from the aircraft into their data center. Right, so the only thing they could do in that environment protected by Vormetric is just, what was it? It was FTP. So the only thing they could do was FTP from source to target. That was it. So they couldn't look inside and say, hey, well, what did you collect today? Couldn't see it. That part's blocked. It's audited. So the only thing they could do is move it from point A to point B. And operationally, if you weren't part of the flight crew, if you weren't an analyst, if you weren't an admin, if you had no business whatsoever, you denied it, you create an audit record. So that's the part that's important. If you're an authorized user, go ahead, let you into the directory, decrypt the data, create a record that says this person came in. But the only way you do it is through this application. If you're mapped to another group, you get the same sort of rules, only for this tool. Okay? Same thing. You enforce it. If you're an administrator, you can declare a set of tools that you use. In this case, it's FTP. The only thing you can do is FTP. To do what? Well, now you can read the data. Only apply key is not applied here. So we'll let you in and create a record that says someone in this group used this tool to read this data. Right? So that's just metadata. Metadata just means we've got 10 terabytes of data that we have to move over. So the log data actually shows a really nice story in real time. So this was from my demo environment. So this is what a log string looks like. Didn't really fit on the screen, so I actually went through and so here's what it looks like. This stuff gets fed into your SIM tool. So if you're using your Splunks, if you're using your Q radars, your McAfees. So what this means is February 9th, 2016, here's your daytime group, here's the server name. So what happened? Somebody in the root group tried to become an authorized user to run cat to read a file in this directory. What happened? No key was applied because of this rule. And so that rule says if you're root, you can't see the data. Right? So that's what that looks like. That's in real time. So if I try to become you, Vormetric blocks that, and that becomes audited. And so now what happens is you'll go, well, Eric, why are you trying to become someone at 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon? Oh, I was prepping for an exercise. I needed to move some data. Well, now you change that policy, boom, then you're done, right? And that becomes a chain of evidence that says, hey, we made a change to your policy in order to allow data access. But if I get that call and says, Eric, your credential was tried to use to read this application, well, what's going on? Well, I'm not at work. I'm not even logged onto the network. Well, now you have something to pay attention to, something that from an NOC perspective that you want to take action on. There's a credential that's been compromised. He's been trying to access data by elevating their privileges, that chain that we talked about earlier. So how this stuff works in your environment. So this is by far not a representative sample, but we deploy, we've done partnerships with every single one of these companies. This is stuff that you buy today, right? You buy your NetApps, you buy your EMCs. From a big data perspective, we work with all these companies. We work with the HPs. Anything from a platform perspective, we work on. Anything from a continuous monitoring perspective, and anything from a database perspective, we work with, right? So definitely not intrusive in any single way. So usually from a non-invasive perspective, the easiest thing that you can do is just take the keys away from everyone else in your environment and just manage it from one device. Right? So operationally, what that means is any key that you have from a certificate from a website, or any key from a storage array, or any key from a database, just pull that all in and manage it there. So what that means is your storage administrator sees less risk, your database administrator sees less risk, your archiving solution sees less risk. Just suck all that piece in, manage your keys, go from there. All right, and so all that's done so that hardware device actually has an HSM inside of it. So your IA guys say, okay, FIPS 140-2 level 3, we trust the root of entropy, now you're done. Easiest way to get set up. The other piece that we look at is, well, now let's carve up our infrastructure. Let's start to share what we actually have, because we can't go out and we can't buy these separate silos anymore, don't have any money. I'll start to talk about one of the other questions I get here in a little bit, but this was a use case that I did for the Joint Warfare Analysis Center, right? So these guys were about to get the program shut down. Eric, we're out of money, can't do anything. So we said, all right, let's actually carve out all of your infrastructure, right? So this is all system high. Let's collect some data here, let's collect data here, collect data here, but create your own domain and expressly separate your duties. And the big piece that was important to them was the data owner had command and control over who had access to the environment, and then the IA role had an audit piece that only saw logs that went to their NOC. And so as a result of cryptographically separating everything in the storage environment, they were able to get rid of every single error gap in their environment. Now, they didn't lose any, they still had to buy more storage, but they ran everything off of one big cluster and could actually show from a IA perspective how everything was separated. There was nothing that could access any other pieces except through the rules that they actually set up in their environment. So they ended up saving a lot of money. So what that means is, so this was a clip that I actually took from a presentation that I saw yesterday, and it said, it's hard to read here, but information silos across various systems and sensors inhibit flexibility and slow the response. Did that for JWAC. They got the benefit. They could share the stuff they wanted to share it. They got to pick how they actually got to share the data. That part's important. And now their effectiveness increased by tenfold. Matter of fact, I mean, number one, they ended up saving a bunch of money on their storage. Program is saved, still running now, one of our better customers. So instead of just stopping there, where else can you start to protect your data? So the other piece is, well, how do you protect your PII, right? How do you protect your social security numbers? Well, now there's an API. Now we have APIs that can say, all right, let's go out. Instead of a social security number, well, what do you want to do with that data? Do you want to encrypt that actual string, or do you want to replace that string value with something that looks like that value so the application still runs? Okay, and so we use that and we call that tokenization. That part actually works with all of your major programming languages. We're doing some stuff with SecureView right now that they're starting to use our APIs to start to do some separation across domains. But the point is, so now you can actually start to, based on policy, something that you set, an existing ConOps that says only this person, based on who you are in your environment, can actually see this string of data, right? So if you ever call your credit card company and the guy on the phone says, hey, Mr. Brown, let's go ahead and give me your last 4 of your social security number, that's the part that you're actually seeing now, because from an operational standpoint, this guy's had no reason to see your entire piece of PII, just the last piece that dedicates who you are. One of the other pieces we just did, so this is something for what's called Docker. So Docker is this hyper-containerized solution. So this is something that for anyone in a quote-unquote big data environment, what they're starting to do is, based on that same environment, you can start to containerize how that data is protected. So if you want to do something rapid, you can spin up a Docker container, pick what processes actually see the data. When that's done, blow that container and especially that key away. Now all that data is gone. Now that data is all completely protected. So now you can run multiple programs inside of multiple libraries inside of that Docker engine, start to collaborate, but no one actually sees the actual source. No human eyes actually sees the key. And so now you take advantage of everything that's been, these are the power of a container, but everything is protected at rest. And you write rules that determine how people access that data inside down to a container level. down to an app level, right? Or you can create a rule that says only this container, only this application can boot inside of this container. Now you start to protect that. Now you start to protect yourself against unauthorized leaks. For any kind of collection environment, we've heard a couple of ISR pieces. Let's collect everything, right? Let's protect how our sources gather data. Each one of these guys can get a key, okay? Let's dump it into whatever your concatenation engine of choice is. It could be HDFS, it could be Hadoop, it could be Hortonworks, it could be NoSQL. You dump it in, just dump it in there, and now no human eyes see how everything is created, okay? When that run is done, blow away your key and encrypt the results, so only a specific application or dashboard can actually search against that. So we were able to do that for a lot of different customers, and so what that meant was if there was an overseas component that was ingesting data and a CONUS component that was ingesting data, what happened is none of those guys could see what was going on, and the analyst on the other end, based on how he was read in, based on how he ran his search, could see a specific set of results, right? So I only see 10 results. There are 15 results. And so what happens is now I have to go to you and say, you're the data owner for these 5 results. Can you please read me in so I can see these last 5 results? Because this is what I'm doing. That's an auditable chain of custody. You give me access. I can finish what I'm doing. The second I'm done, you take control of your data again. All that's completely auditable. So now you can come, there's this big chain that says something happened in the world. I changed my policy. I did some stuff, everything is done, now you change it back. So take advantage of these hypercompute clusters, take advantage of being able to collect unstructured, semi-structured, and structured data all into one compute cluster and do your queries. This is talking about some of the tokenization piece where you only fuzz the first couple of bits of your alphanumeric string, right? So now what that means is you can do what's called a sub-binary encryption operation. So if you're collecting data and there is a string that is a face, now you can encrypt that face and only allow that face to be unencrypted based on who you are. One of the other questions that we get is, well, Eric, how does this work in the cloud? We're cloud first. And I go, well, okay, well, it's great that you're cloud first. Well, what happens to the data in your environment? Well, we buy our encryption from the cloud provider. Okay. What if you switch cloud providers? So you just switched hardware. What if you switch cloud providers? It's an awkward silence. So Marine Corps had this kind of similar use case. It said, hey, we want to use this cloud, but we really want to have the ability to push a button in our data center and completely blow away keys in that one cloud environment and stand everything back up in another cloud environment. Well, I said, if you're going to do that for this first cloud provider, you're going to need command and control over your crypto. Yeah, we do need that. Okay, so what we did for them, all of the controls that I talked about earlier originates here. So all of your keys and policy originates here, but now all that protection sits in the cloud. So they were able to take advantage of all that infrastructure, all that storage in a cloud environment, in a shared environment. No one has access to the environment. What they were able to do in SharePoint and push a button on their hardware device right here, completely blow away all the keys and stood it up in another cloud. And so this happened. So we talked about stuff that's rapidly deployable. They were able to do this in about 4 hours. So this was me walking into the building, setting up some stuff in the cloud, deploying our hardware, deploying our software, and dumping data in. This was all done in 4 hours. These guys couldn't believe it. I said, wait a minute, we're done. Yes, we're done. Pretty simple stuff. Create your rules, create your policies, create your keys, you're done. So the next question I got from those guys, well, wait a minute, what about long-term storage, right? We don't have access to the infrastructure. We're just presented with object-based storage. Well, great. So the same model applies. Create your keys on your site. Anything, so we have what's called a gateway. So we've got a gateway that just acts as a proxy, as a virtual appliance. Anything that washes through your environment that's bound for Amazon or Box or OneDrive or Office 365 picks up a key, gets dropped into that environment encrypted. No one else has the ability to see the contents of that data. If anything else gets put into the box, anything gets put into that environment, into that bucket, Well, that gets wrapped up with the key too. And then you get all of the policies that say, well, the only way you can see that data in the clear is you have to meet policy. So you have to be the right user, you have to be in the right group, you have to see the right application. Now we see data in the clear. And so that takes risk completely off the table in terms of deploying things in the cloud. This is something that some guys over in Joint Staff is doing, right? So they're deploying everything on a operationally high network, but the admins, the problem they had, the admins, they kept having to read these guys into their program because they needed the guys cleared because they were using their infrastructure. And so we did something like this for those guys, and so now they were able to take advantage of that infrastructure, drop their data in. It was completely separated from all the other guys in the infrastructure that didn't have access. And so now they're starting to read people out of their programs now because no one has access to the data. They can just go in and request and say, hey, give me some infrastructure, give me some storage, give me this, and then they drop it in, they create rules, they create the policy, and they're done. One other piece that a lot of people don't start to realize is as you're starting to collect this data, so there's all this log data that's coming on and you're using these whiz-bang great tools to do analytics on the data, well, that log data is also important too. This is a pilot that we did with the Department of Justice that said, well, wait a minute, we're collecting this log data, we're collecting all this data from our servers for forensic purposes. There's an admin in that environment that can see all of this. And so what we did for them was created a rule that says only all this sat in the database, right? And so now we create a rule that says only the person inside this, only the executable inside that database, in this case it was McAfee, only that tool has access to see that data in the clear. And so if you want to see it, you actually have to log into that tool in order to see the data. So stops all that side channel stuff. So that was one tier. Once they created a result, they ran it up to another dashboard where you just repeated the process, right? And so now only that executable, in this case it was Splunk, that could see that result. And so now you had these two tiers of protection based on whether or not if you were a tenant or a landlord in that environment. So your log data is also important. One of the other pieces, so usually at this point there's a moment of clarity and say, well, Eric, how do I get started? I can't take my data down. How do I get started? Makes sense. So what we'll do, so we have something that we call live data transformation. Allocate some CPU, so it doesn't have to be a lot, and just point it at your data that you need to start to encrypt, right? So you have to move from data being unencrypted to data being encrypted, right? So initially, sometimes you'd have to, it involves an outage, it involves a maintenance window. So now, instead of trying to plan a maintenance window, let's just start to allocate how much CPU you have available. So maybe Monday through Friday from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., you use 2%, right? And so now you start to chug on it. Let's start to encrypt your data a little bit. But on the weekends, there's no one here, let's crank that up to about 50%. And the result is all of your data gets encrypted without taking any of your applications down, without using a maintenance window. The other question that I get is, number one, Eric, who is using your environment and has it been accredited? And here's my special piece that has to be CNA, right? So here's the piece that we do. So I've got a booth over here. I've already mapped it to 853, so here's all those controls, and then the 853 piece is the framework to do Icd 503 or some of the FedRAMP stuff. So if you start with 853, you're halfway down the road right there. The other piece the other question that we get is the common criteria portion, right? So we're doing the common criteria piece. The common criteria piece actually feeds into NPO's CSFC, Commercial Solutions for Classified Environments, right? So we've got that piece working as well. Any of our other components, so we've got FIPS 140-2 level 3 and 2 and 1. So any flavor of FIPS that you want to operationalize and use, we've got a flavor for that as well. It's been die-capped. All this stuff has been translated to DSKID 6.3 or any of these other places. Okay. Here's a small sample of some of our clients. I'd be happy to go into detail about how some of these guys are using us to solve some problems. And here I'm going to pause and take time for any questions.
Data security manager, does that by any chance work with any of the directory services applications like Ldap or Active Directory?
Yep. So the question was, does our hardware appliance actually integrate with Ldap and Active Directory? Short answer is yes. So this guy. So, yeah, this guy, you can definitely plug this piece into your Ldap or your Active Directory. Yep. So what we'll do is we'll look at the first two attributes. We'll look at user membership and group membership, right? And so that's the easier piece. So you can do it on your own inside of Vormetric, but if you've got AD, you just plug into that, read it, pull your credentials, and you're done. Okay. Awesome. Here, let me go and do this part, and